Hey up and welcome to the Strategy Sessions. My name is Andy Jarvis. I am the host of the show and the Strategy Director at XMO Marketing. Thank you for coming along to listen. Though you haven't really come to listen to me, you've come to listen to my guest today, Pritesh Gadhia. Pritesh is the Managing Director of Accenture Song. If you don't know Accenture Song, you probably should. They're possibly the world's biggest agency and rebranded recently from Accenture Interactive into Accenture Song. And as they did that, kind of pulled a whole load of different separate brands into one master brand. We talk about that, about the rebranding process, about what it's like when people lift their eyebrows at you when you've rebranded, but also about the human impact and the human element of that. How do you bring people from dozens of brands under one master brand and make them all feel like they're all part of the same thing? We talk about the challenges facing CMOs coming up over the next year or two. There's a recession looming. If you didn't know, we've got rising price crises, cost of living, all that sort of stuff. And we also talk about diversity of thought, diversity of teams, about lessons from Sir Alex Ferguson, but also about mental health and how that discussion has changed over the years and the impact particularly on migrant families as well. It's an interesting, thoughtful discussion that kind of meanders its way through different subjects and topics all the time with Pritesh just bossing it as he does. He's just great to listen to. So thank you for coming along to check this episode out. No sponsors messages today, nothing to really sell to you, nothing really. So let's just get on with the episode, shall we? Over to when I met Pritesh at the end of October and we sat around chatting for an hour. Here we go. So my guest today on the Strategy Sessions podcast is Pritesh Gadhia from Accenture Song. Pritesh, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me here. I'm doing really well. It is great. It's great to have the opportunity just to chat, Andy.
Well, and thank you for your time. I imagine Managing Director is a big title, so you must be fairly busy. So to be able to carve out an hour of your schedule, I'm really grateful for.
Pleasure.
Do you want to tell people who are listening a little bit more about Accenture Song? It's a relatively new name in the market or a rebrand into the market. So do you want to explain kind of what the company is and what your role is within the company?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I often describe Accenture Song as Accenture's best kept secret. We were formed, we used to be called Accenture Interactive is the first point to note. We now stand at about just over 1,000 people, built from 14 different brands. The majority of Accenture Song is actually formed through acquisition, not through homegrown Accenture individuals. And really Accenture Song, which was previously Accenture Interactive, was created because the old agency models we felt were not really fit for purpose. Communications models that relied on, paid media, interrupting people's lives are being replaced by brands looking just to be more relevant and not needing to push themselves so much and not needing to sell stuff people don't perhaps really need that much. Where once you look to a product, we're now moving towards really understanding our customers and being what I call life-centric. So it fits with the new art. I call it the third way, occupying the ground between agency networks and global consulting firms, just a new way to grow and transform businesses, bringing together a host of capabilities and functions from across the creative to the data, to the design, to the technology. In some ways, it's creating an industry of one. There is nobody else really like it with the creativity and brand strategy in its soul to I guess, deliver technology that scales to address sort of current problems. We made the decision to rebrand ourselves to Accenture Song last year. We were doing very well as an organization, but we felt that building on that sort of long-standing culture of the different parts and breeds of the companies that had come together and the culture of Accenture's habit to change, we wanted something that could bring those brands together universally, that was enduring, had a connection to craft, innovation, inspiration, technical prowess, but also at the heart of it was about imagination, about ideas, about things that really stick. And so Accenture Song really reflects those many dimensions and layers of what we're about and what we try to accomplish for our people. And it's, it's a really important and really exciting step for us. Globally, we brought together over 40 acquisitions that we'd acquired over the last sort of decade, to really create something, as I said, that synergizes sort of design, marketing, technology to really drive new thinking.
I think there's something really interesting about the rebrand is that the bit you see on the front end is all the opinion pieces being written about whether people like it, whether they don't like it, whether it was a good idea, whether it was a bad idea. But I think the really interesting thing for me with the rebrand, especially the way you tackled it, is that bringing all those other brands under the umbrella of one name, Accenture Song, and almost the human element in that of all those people who have sort of moved from working for a semi-independent agency or an agency with a different name, all becoming part of this one thing, and the people element behind there. That must be the real job to do in the rebrand, and the real success story of the rebrand is how all that lands.
Yeah, and for those people that have followed Accenture Interactive, they'll know that when we acquired the likes of Karma Field in the UK or Rothco in Ireland, we didn't immediately expand on the brand, right? Because these are people, these things mean something to them, right? These identities. And we wanted to focus on making them feel part of what was then Accenture Interactive, what it meant and how we could succeed. And then over time, I'm sure when David took the role 2 years ago, he wanted to do this and thought about doing this and taking the role, but we did it very, very carefully. And we still continue to focus on our people, about making sure that they are part of the journey of what Accenture Song is going to be. We don't have all the answers. If we had all the answers, so if somebody had all the answers, they'd be doing this already, right? So this is a journey together. Positively, the people have been amazing and excited by being within something new and different, right? And also standing on the shoulders of what is the biggest global consulting firm in the world. So we know we can still do brilliant craft and design, but we know we can deliver that now with real purpose and real intention that can actually make a difference. This is not just now about the advertising or brilliant design, all of which is important, but about how it makes consumers' lives, customers' lives easier.
Yeah. And this, the phrase I've seen when I've been doing my bits of research for this
Right.
is more than just an agency. And I think you've started to touch on that already, between that bringing together of creativity and data and analytics and digital transformations, I think in some essences as well. Is this, as you said, the new future of agencies? Do you see this leading another agency networks thinking, right, we now have to catch up and bridge that gap?
Yeah, there is a lot of interest out there around who we are and what we stand for, and a concern from the competition, for sure. I mean, because this represents, Accenture Song represents sort of an evolution post-pandemic, right? In sort of a new world order where how you connect and engage with customers has to change. And if you're going to do that, you've got to put technology, data, and creativity at the heart of every business problem. The old models, the old answers don't work. So we believe we've created something that can really sit at the core of how you drive greater growth and greater relevance for brands that are more appealing and sustainable for their consumers, because we have all the component parts.
And what sort of steps are you taking as an organization to do that? Because I know anyone who listening who has worked with some great creatives in the past know that great creatives sometimes have a reputation for being relatively prickly when challenged, and the data community maybe also shares that reputation. So how do you bring together sort of two quite different skill sets, but actually we all know that when you get them together and they do it right, the power is there to take everything on a level. But again, from a people level, what are you doing to be able to bring those two skills together and help them work in a more productive way for your clients?
And yeah, I think it's a fascinating question, and one of the most interesting and challenging parts of my job, all right? In that, as you rightly point out, we have so much diverse talent. And we often think about diversity in the sense that we all read about, right? We're talking inclusion, diversity. This is diversity of talent, but the power comes from that collective. The power comes from the constellation of those individual stars, right? And let's be clear, they are brilliant. We've got some of the best talent probably globally in Accenture Song, which you know, as you say, can you know, is challenging because they have points of view, strong points of view. We've always been an inclusive organization, regardless of where people have come from. And, you know, without going into specifics on data, our attrition at the creative level is extraordinarily high. In fact, at all levels in Accenture Song, because people are starting to really embrace it. You know, it comes down to nothing more than making sure we are doing the right type of work or problem solving for our clients. You know, nobody, me particularly, doesn't sit within Accenture Song saying, as a creative, you're no longer going to do the best brand work or advertising work. Of course you are, or the best design work. But what we want to do is make that more accessible and make the value or the meaning and purpose of that brand narrative that you put together in front of consumers so more people see it, feel it, and believe it. This is no longer about what I call the wrapping paper. This is about what's inside the box or the product, right? And putting it in their hands. And as soon as our teams start to feel it, touch it, see it, and know the scale of the difference they can make, they love it. And if you combine that opportunity for doing big scale stuff, if you like, with still being able to do brilliant craft, you know, you're achieving the best of both worlds. And that's why they enjoy it so much. That's why it's hard, but that's why they enjoy it so much.
And look, I suppose nothing that's easy is ever really all that great, right? So if it's difficult, you know that the challenge is there and you're heading in the right direction.
Well, exactly.
I love that phrase about it's not just about the wrapping paper, it's what's inside the box. And marketing departments, marketing teams for years have been known as the colouring in department and whatever, right? But there is an issue that I suppose big organizations operate in silos a lot of the time for very good reasons. Silos are seen as being always negative, but there are good reasons why organizations have this department looking after this and another department doing other things. But when you start talking about doing those big projects and transformations, bringing purpose to it and what's inside the box, not just the wrapping paper, that must be a challenge for your clients as well, to be able to get out of the silos that they work in, to bring the right people to the party. Are you seeing that organizations are ready to have this type of approach now, or is it still you're having to work with your clients as well as internally to be able to deliver these things?
Andy, it's you know, it's not missed anybody's attention that things have changed, and things have changed remarkably over the last few years. I mean, you know, I can't remember ever reading about or seeing such a level of quick-paced change for consumer, right? Ever in my career, certainly. And customers are out there going, sorry, my life is changing faster than ever. How are you gonna help me now? How are you gonna stay relevant? Companies have spent so long worrying about their bottom line, right, and about their profit and their sales and their revenue. No, they need to start thinking about the individual and what they're doing for the consumer. And so every organization is starting to feel that. And you know, I think we did some analysis and found that 64% of companies, 64% wish they could respond faster to consumers' changing needs, right? And 95%, Andy, executives thinks they don't understand or can't change fast enough, right? And when you think that's customers, when you think who is the heart of the customer and what the company stands for, it's marketing, right? And it's about the brand and it's about what you stand for and how you become more relevant, right? Yes, you've got to have great products, you've got to go have services, but you've got to be able to deliver them in a way that are meaningful for customers. So we're seeing it. We're seeing companies want to and address that change and be more life-centric, but it is incredibly hard. You know, the individual, as you said, the individual silos within organizations mean that when you want to address a problem around customer, right? When you're trying to be customer focused or life-centric, you've got to be able to bring all those bits together. Otherwise, it's always disjointed. Do you think about the number of organizations you deal with or the services you buy from organizations, whether it's insurance, banking, telecommunications, one interaction point tends to be almost completely different to the other. Or
painfully so.
Yeah, or you see an advert, or you see some brand marketing, and you'll go, okay, that's great. But then you go to interact with it, and the product doesn't fit the message.
Or your call is important to us. Please stay on hold for another 98 minutes.
and customers are, it's a paradox, because customers are now much more fickle than they ever were, and they have much more choice, and they want it at the point of need in the way that suits them. And every individual, Andy, this is the problem, every individual is different in a different stage of life, right? You maybe work from home more, doing the strategy work you do. I'm on the road quite a lot. Joe probably has a different lifestyle and a different set of needs. You've got parents, single mums, grandfathers. Everybody has a different perspective on what's important to them now.
Do you think as well, I hate the word disruption. It's one of those words that has been hammered to pieces, and now it's almost meaningless, but I'll stick with it anyway for the purposes of the story and the question. But when you see kind of disruptive things happening in the industry, they're often driven by maybe newer, smaller businesses. And I'll give you an example of Bloom & Wild, the flower delivery company, who kind of gate crashed into an industry. But one of the things they were the pioneers of, I think they called it the thoughtful marketing movement, was being able to opt out of a Mother's Day, Father's Day, those type of anniversary marketing emails, because they can be quite upsetting to people who've maybe recently lost a relative. Now, they could do that because they were small, they saw a problem, and they fixed it. Bigger organizations, some of which are still trying to catch up 4 or 5 years after Bloom & Wild launched that, because the technology doesn't allow them to do it. And these are the sorts of tangled webs of companies, the bigger ones who you're working with. And, are they ready to face this challenge? Is that where they are at the minute and trying to plot their way through this? Is that the sort of the things you see at the moment?
So it is without doubt that, the smaller, more disruptive companies have gained share in certain industries, right? And you just look at financial services and the neobanks, right? I mean, they've done an incredible job and have great technology at the heart of it. And that's true in other industries, which makes it very hard for your traditional brands to grow and compete. And so their challenge is, how do I address that disruption, and how do I become leaner and deliver innovation quicker? And that's a lot of what they're struggling with, which is, how do I become more relevant to my consumers, and who's going to help me stitch the pieces together? But it can be done. It's also about creating white space within an existing brand. So Liberty Global, you may have heard of, the big communications company. We're working with them on renewable energy venture called Egg, right? Offering a subscription-based service for home charging of vehicles, where you can almost buy it on tap, low upfront costs, maintenance costs included, but tapping into their massive expertise of being able to deliver subscription stuff, and making it easier for consumers, knowing they're going to a brand that is well known and ultimately can be trusted. So it can be done. And that's just one example of larger, well-established brands starting to adapt to be more agile, data-driven, consumer life-centric focused. And it's happening. But that's why it's difficult.
On the issue of being data-driven, data can be a blessing as well as a curse, right? Can't it, for organizations, in terms of two things. One, knowing when you have enough data to make a decision, I think can be really difficult in a world now where we are potentially drowning in data. And two, knowing that your data is accurate when the large companies, the Googles and the Metas of this world, are effectively marking their own homework when it comes to the data. Now, I'm not going to ask you to comment on that particularly, but knowing, what sort of tests are you applying when you're working with companies to say, right, how do you know when you've got enough data, and how have we tested the accuracy of this before we start using it to make big decisions?
And you're right, because the data can be a blessing and a curse, right? And you do have to be cautious, because you do have to think about seeing people beyond static, one-dimensional, and think about the human aspects of the individual and what the company is trying to do for that individual in the lifestyle and circumstances they're at. So we always support a data-driven view with user research, heuristic analysis, and really try and bring the intent there so that they are being more relevant, and really think about not what's the data telling them, but what's the unmet need they're trying to address for the consumer, right? And a lot of talk goes on about data and data lakes and this and that, but many organizations have struggled. Many still have lots of data puddles, right? Lots of data puddles rather than data lakes, right? They don't really have a joined up view of the consumer, not as much as they would like. And so part of the challenge is helping us support them and thinking about insight that we can gain from what they're doing today. And obviously you touched on it, we won't go deep into it because I'm by no means an expert, but when you think about the cookieless future as well, right? There's less data available, or the less of the type that they might be using today, right? And actually, you think about what happens in times of recession. In times of recession, people drive into performance marketing, but often don't understand the output of what performance marketing is doing, or the baseline which they use is incorrect, right? So you do have to be very cautious around the data, and that's why a bit more holistic view, I think, is important to understand and get to know your consumer and have a real profound understanding of them.
Regular listeners will know that I occasionally raise an eyebrow at performance marketing. I love it. I think it does wonderful stuff. I'm not entirely convinced. I love talking to performance marketers who will tell you that marketing only existed for 15 years when they started doing their thing, right? Which is one of the reasons I get a bit sneery about performance marketing. But we both know that as the recession is coming, or is perhaps here, depending on which data you look at, a lot of companies are going to double down on performance marketing, possibly to the expense of further up the funnel stuff, brand marketing or anything else. What's your take on that? Is that a good thing to be doing? Should companies be having that wider view? You know, how bad's it going to get, do you think, before people start to realize there's maybe more than that?
Yeah, my sense is that unless they're set up incredibly well to react to the outcomes they're seeing, which I think is harder than it sounds, and have confidence in that through a recession, what you've got to try and do, yes, you've got to drive traffic, perhaps. You have got to do that in a way that includes some performance marketing, but you've got to maintain the longevity of your brand and understand your consumer and the way it's changing, right? And I don't think performance marketing always does that, right? And we always see this dip, recession, performance marketing, oops, then didn't really drive anything else, not investing enough in the brand. So it's all about balance, right? It is all about balance and making sure that what you stand for is not trying to get more share of wallet from people who haven't got any, but be a destination for people that, to see as somebody who cares about them as individuals.
It's recently, as we're recording this in late October, recently the CEO of ASOS has said that he thinks they should have maybe invested more in brand marketing over the last couple of years, where they've been heavily performance marketing focused. I think, he also touches on other problems within the business that have caused their loss at the moment. But one of the things he highlighted was that there's been a rising cost of customer acquisition, which is something that almost everyone on the podcast has talked about over the last number of months and years, really. Declining ad inventory and increasing costs on that. Is that sort of something that your performance marketing teams are fighting with at the moment as well?
I think it comes outside of the remit of performance marketing. I think the issue is we're entering a period of time where we have what I call a crisis of relevance. Brands are no longer are losing relevance. So focusing on the performance side of it rather than the brand side of it is where it starts to become a mistake. They need to rebuild the connection of what their products and services mean for their consumer and really pack that, as I talked about before, in terms of, every customer, even of ASOS, is of a different type and a different ilk. Not the same performance marketing rules are going to work, right? And we know that, right? And so you've got to really think about it in a much more customer-centric way, or life-centric way, to be able to drive where you're gonna grow and be more appealing in that way, which means really understanding them, really thinking about how you're driving value, and really making experience of your brand across every single touch point much more powerful. It is, price, of course, is important in a recession, don't get me wrong, but it's not just always all about price if you want to maintain the relevance of your brand through all types of consumers, right? You often don't want the ones, you do want as many customers as you can, of course, but you don't necessarily keep targeting the same ones that have a low wallet price or basket size. You want the breadth of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the crisis of relevance, and it's kind of weaved its way through the whole interview there with the research that backed it up. I think is a great piece to go and have a look at. I'll maybe put a link to it in the show notes. If you want to know how to do market research, a huge amount of qual research got into that, and then followed up quant. Sorry, let me get that right. A huge amount of quant research got into it, followed up with some great qual stuff, some focus groups, and adding color to it. I refer to it as black and white and color. And when you put the two together, you get much more rich insights. So firstly, if you're looking for how to do research, go and have a look at the methodology behind this. It's fantastic. But this has been a great piece of research that is one of a number of things that Accenture Song are doing this year in terms of understanding the market. How well has it been received in the market, this research?
Really well, actually. When you go and talk to clients about, being more relevant, life-centric, really think about how you're going to grow, put it in the words of growth through being more relevant, right? Because there's an issue with us needing to be more life-centric and understanding them. And, 97% of the execs thought that they were falling short. And then talking about the challenges in terms of bringing the different elements of the organization together, broadening your understanding of the consumer, et cetera, as it says in the playbook. They sit down and go, that makes so much sense. How, right? And actually we can help, but a lot of it is down to them changing how they work as organizations and bringing the component parts together. And this really is a C-suite level conversation and a C-suite level intervention to really drive a new way of growth.
Mm-hmm. So what, if you were looking at things and levers that you can pull to drive growth over the next few years, and we know there's some sort of, if not a recession, a slowdown, but probably a recession coming. So this is always a folly sort of direction, but I'm going to ask you anyway. In terms of your crystal ball, what trends and innovations and things do you see coming over the next couple of years? So, we know we've talked about ASOS, and a lot of other fast fashion brands are under pressure. Direct-to-consumer brands like Eve have just been through a real turbulent time, and some high street names are struggling. Where do you see the big opportunities over the next year or two?
My sense is that organizations will double down in getting more out of what their brands stand for and delivering on the value of their brands, right? There'll be some reinvention of new products and services for sure, and some investment in innovation. In particular, I think an area that has really not taken off in the way I think people thought it would do is business to business, B2B commerce, if you like. Yep. Particularly in the areas of financial services and in the areas of the sort of software and platforms type of stuff, the Googles, Salesforces, etc. And I think that's a big area of growth. I think we will see larger organizations, I use the example of Liberty Global and Egg, investing in new ways to really meet needs of consumers they hadn't realized they needed to do. So the unmet needs, whether it's around sustainability or around how do I bring, if you're a financial organization or an insurance company, how do I bring my services together in much more of a cohesive way that I'm easier to do business with, right? That I'm stitched at the heart of when they become a teenager right through to a university student, right? Mm-hmm. So they would be a sort of a couple of areas that I would see growing, but the competition isn't going anywhere, right? The likes of Amazon, Google, etc. So they've got to stay on the front foot. They've got to stay on their toes.
And do you think marketing budgets will come under pressure in the next few years as well?
They always do. I think the Bellwether report, and I'll probably misquote the numbers, so I won't say them. I think they're seeing a slight pressure and reduction, right? Mm-hmm. And the role of the marketeer or the CMO is to really be at front and center of what does it mean to deliver value of a brand? As you jokingly said, the coloring department, we all know actually they could be and should be at the heart of customer, and therefore need to have an understanding of not just brand and marketing, but technology, data, the business, and how they can be the new individuals that can drive the stitching and the different component parts of what life for a customer could mean when interacting with their particular brand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I often describe marketing as the voice of customer in the organization. And if we can be the advocates for that and be the ones who lead on that, whether it's technology change or whatever that is, but be the ones who bring the voice of the person who uses our service into the room. That's the way to do it. And it's difficult to do. And the bigger the organization, the harder it is, but it's absolutely essential for our future success and prosperity.
It is. And I think we'll see a new breed of marketer as a result, right? Which would be good for everyone.
Yeah. And I think the new breed of marketeer, I suspect from my own sort of experience over the last few years, is much more comfortable talking about the different arms of the role, data, creativity together, rather than being one or the other. I get a feeling from some of the people I've interviewed and met and worked with over the years that is becoming much more of the norm skill set really in the role.
Yeah, it has to be. For them to succeed, they have to be very multi-hatted, more so than they've ever been, as you said, around understanding much more than just brand.
While we're talking about multi-hatted and different skill sets and being familiar with data, just to talk about you a little bit, because you've got an interesting background and a route in here. So your LinkedIn profile tells me that you started with an IT degree in Manchester. How does an IT degree plot a course all the way through to heading up one of the world's biggest agencies? How does that happen? What were the steps along the way?
It's a great question. I often sit there myself and smile and say, this is incredible, and I'm really grateful for having been able to do this for the last 2 years already. So when I finished my degree, I had the vision of wanting to work for a company like Anderson Consulting, which was at the time.
Retro. There you go.
Retro, yeah. And so there I was at Accenture, being part of an organization that really solved complex delivery problems using technology. And I almost fell into the world of digital by luck when I started doing work on websites, the likes of Sainsbury's, Tesco, all the quite a few of the major high street brands. And from there, really developed a understanding and a passion for how to creatively deploy technologies. So in the earlier days of digital technology, it was all about agile product ownership, right? It was doing a different way of delivery. And so the heart of what I was passionate about was applying creativity in a way I deliver technology. And then that led to me being part of Accenture Digital. I then ran Accenture Digital in the UK for a few years. And, as the creative agencies started to come together with technology at their heart, creatively led technology, they wanted somebody that could fit that mold, could leverage the incredible creative talent around them, because I'm not a creative brand person, but I knew Accenture and I knew technology and I knew how to solve scaled complex problems for clients. So what I try and do is bring the best of traditional Accenture, the Accenture your mum and dad knew, together with the new Accenture and create that sort of special energy. So that's how it's happened. And, I've had great fun, have an amazing team. We do great work and, may it continue. But yeah, I'm a very unusual breed of individual to be doing this role. But I think that's the reason perhaps I've been able to drive the scale of change, because I bring the discipline of a non-creative to a creative world. And I think it needs both.
Yeah. And so scrolling back on your CV as well, I spotted you'd done a couple of years at Procter & Gamble as well. Now, I could well do a whole podcast one day just interviewing people who've worked at P&G, because I find it fascinating the way they tackle problems. We've had maybe 3, possibly 4 ex-P&G people on. Anyway, it doesn't matter, a number of them, right? And it's a really interesting and different way to a lot of companies to tackle. Did you have, a few good years there? Were the things that you learned at P&G that were like eye-opening and then you brought through into the rest of your career, or were you there just too briefly?
No, it was a really interesting spot, an interesting question. It's now P&G, but I was actually part of Gillette, the best a man could get at the time. And you talk about the power of a brand at the time, right? Wow, right? That doesn't work anymore, but at the time it did. And I had an amazing job, and probably one of the best bosses, I've had few best bosses throughout my career. And I led the data analytics and warehouse program, which is putting data at the heart of how you sold some of Gillette's biggest and best products. Mm-hmm. It was an incredible role all around Europe. And that's where I cut my teeth on wanting to do complex delivery at scale, right? Yeah. With creativity and data at the heart of it, and building data warehouses, star schemas, writing code. It was a brilliant experience.
I'm just trying to get my head around the scale of what Gillette is. I mean, it's a phenomenal business, right? And they're, from a marketing perspective, I think, is their marketing, or used to anyway, be to target young shavers, just as sort of young lads were coming into sort of shaving age, with free trials and various bits and bobs, and capturing them in magazines, so FHM magazine and things like that when I were a lad, back in it. But even just the scale of the organization, though, and distribution, and how all those things come together, it must have been a hell of a learning curve.
It was brilliant, but it always had the brand at the heart, and how the brand would fit with what was the understood to be the consumer at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was a very similar mold of consumer, right? At the time, if you think about the adverts, right? And it had it down to a T, and its user research, but the quality of its product as well, was second to none. And so they had, I wouldn't say an easy job at all, but they had all the right ingredients at the time. Yeah. And they did incredibly well out of it. And yeah, it was a brilliant experience. And it was a really well-run global organization, had a great management team, and very data and tech driven. Or I would say very ahead of its time, actually, very ahead of its time.
No, and you can see that. And for all the sort of direct-to-consumer upstarts that have come into Gillette's category at various points to disrupt it and take market share and do X, Y, and Z, if you look at the facts, Gillette is still miles bigger than anybody else in that category. Not even close, not even close.
No, it was great fun.
So as a leader, you're coming through, you've worked in a couple of different places, you got into Accenture, you've progressed through and done a number of different roles. But as you get to be sort of leadership positions in the company, how do you stay relevant, and how do you stay across everything that's happening, in the world, changes that go on in the world that you need to be aware of to stay relevant to your organization?
I mean, there's always the traditional ways of the daily podcasts, etc. But I find the most useful way is talking to my clients, by understanding about the challenges they're facing, and even people like you, Andy, just the sense of the questions tells me we're not that far off from focusing on the right areas, right? As a company, we're just talking to clients and then debating them with my team or with other parts of Accenture to say, okay, what are you hearing? What are the problems the clients are facing that you're hearing, and how are they dealing with this massive disruption? How are they feeling about it? And what's the sense you pick up on the market? Is it slowing down? Is it pausing? And it's just being attuned to that. And then also mixing that with my own things I have to do or want to do to keep myself sane, right? Whether it's the sport or not.
So switching off is a really underrated skill, isn't it? To be able to stay focused and stay fresh, is being able to turn off sometimes and just take something else in.
I learned that the hard way, right? As many of my colleagues will know, I'm a big, advocate of supporting people's mental health, because, if you don't know about it, you can't deal with it, right? And if you haven't got the courage to talk about it, people don't know. So it's not been easy, right? I've had tough times, as many of people who know me will know. But so I learned the hard way that taking time out, talking to people, having the courage to go, I don't feel great, or it's okay not to be okay, that brilliant term, is fine. It's not, we should know it's okay. And also having the courage to ask for help, Andy. I did a CNBC webcast or podcast recently where they asked me about leadership lessons. And one of the big ones was having the courage to ask for help. I still remember very clearly to this day, two very significant examples where I put my hand up and goes, I need help. And you and I both know, and Joe knows this well, nobody gets fired for asking for help, right?
It's interesting. The word that gets used a lot is brave. And Zaid Al-Qassab, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Channel 4, also Procter & Gamble, and also previous guest on the podcast, wrote a LinkedIn post maybe 5-6 months ago, where he it wasn't a LinkedIn post, sorry, he wrote a piece in Campaign magazine about how he has lived with depression for 10-15 years and how he has managed that and found a natural home in Channel 4, which allows him to talk openly about that in a way that he maybe hasn't been able to in other organizations. And people said underneath Zaid's post, said, look, this is brave of you to say these things. Now, it is brave, but I'd like, I think the journey we're going on as a country and as business community is that 15-20 years ago, it was a problem to talk about mental health issues. Now we're in a position where people are saying this is brave and brilliant. And I think in 20 years' time, hopefully it'll just be normalized, where it'll just be like, of course you talk about that. And is that the sort of journey you see companies going on at the minute, where it is just becoming normalized to say, look, I'm having problems here. We need help, or I need help.
Yeah, and it's not too dissimilar to all the controversy around Black Lives Matter, right? We need to move it from a moment to something that becomes normalized or a movement that it's okay to talk about mental health. It's not demonized, it's not glamorized, it's normalized, right? Yeah. And it becomes part of what everybody feels comfortable mentioning. You're right, it was so stigmatized in the day, right? And yeah, and even growing up with the challenges I had around my parents, right? You'd never go to school and talk about what you were experiencing in 1,000 years in those days, right? But today, people are just so much more willing to hear you, to see you, and to support you through the journey you go through. And I think that's so important. And why it's important and incumbent on leaders to talk about it is if they don't hear from other people, as you say, being brave enough to talk about it, then they won't talk about it. And you're right, when you're a certain level in an organization, it is a brave thing to do, because you don't want people to think this individual isn't strong enough or isn't cut out for this company, etc., etc. We have these, our own internal biases towards how we will be perceived, that we need to remember are always true.
And you mentioned my old man, my dad is from the Caribbean, so migrant family coming over to the UK on the Windrush generation. Yeah. And it's interesting that I feel like it's taken longer for this movement to talk about mental health to land with my dad and people of his generation, and especially migrant generations, where I think the challenges that they faced growing up in the UK in the 70s almost made them feel like they had to be bulletproof. They had to have this thick skin against everything, and admitting weakness was a problem, and you never let a crack in your armor ever. And seeing it now as he's in his 60s and in his late 60s and sort of starting to open up and go, actually, no, it is a challenge sometimes, is a really interesting thing to see. And it's that migrant community mindset where I think they just had to be tough when they came over to try and get through.
I think that's so true. Culture has so much of a part to play in it. I'm a first generation immigrant, right? And, we were very growing up in a white area, right? Very closed off, very insular, didn't talk about anything outside the little family box, nobody had any awareness. And that was just kind of how you lived, right? And nobody thought it was okay if one of your parents was going through problems to go out there and ask for help or tell other family members. No, you don't do that. No, it's got to go like this, and this. And thankfully those norms are changing now, and every generation and every culture is saying, I'm seeing it, and therefore I can support it, and feel it.
Brilliant. No, and it's definitely a good thing. Absolutely. So for sure. As we're coming towards the end of the interview, we kind of touched on how do you stay relevant, but I am interested in asking about if there's any books that you found really influential or that you're reading at the minute that you think would be useful for other people to have a read of or dive into and see if they can find some benefit from that too.
I thought about that as one of the things you might ask, and there's so many out there, but the life is changing so fast. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have gone back to the old back catalogue of stuff everybody's reading. I find the easiest way now is to listen to podcasts from people like yourself, listen to people who are in the industry and current. There are a few books I like because I'm a big fan of Sir Alex Ferguson. His book on leadership lessons, I think, was invaluable in terms of, really simple advice of managing high performance teams. But I'll be honest, there's no standout for me that is relevant today.
Mm-hmm.
That's the issue. That's why I think the current dynamic is so strange. We are rewriting the books now, Andy.
As we go. Now, I don't want to put any of your leadership team, I don't want to get them worrying, but I am going to ask a follow-up question about Sir Alex Ferguson's book on leadership. I haven't read it, but there's a story I've heard, maybe on another podcast, maybe elsewhere, is that one of the ways he stayed fresh and relevant and kept moving as a guy who was there years and years and years was that every couple of years he got rid of his assistants and brought in a whole new set of assistants. So a new assistant manager came through every couple of years. And if you look, if you go back through the history of United, he did sort of refresh them because they brought in new thinking and challenged them in different ways. So as I say, if your leadership team's listening, I'm not suggesting that you start pushing them all out elsewhere. But is that something that is really useful, sort of new voices coming into the room as a leader and hearing different perspectives to try and challenge you again and to keep you moving forward?
So I think that's a wonderful question. So first of all, the reason for that was twofold. One, yes, a bit of a refresh, but two, because he was such a brilliant leader, his assistants became so attractive in the marketplace. A lot of them are both, right?
Yeah.
To take Sir Alex lessons elsewhere, and they didn't all succeed, of course. But the second thing, I think the worst thing you can do is surround yourself with people that always agree with your opinion. And sometimes that can happen, and it's therefore important to shake it up. And Sir Alex's world, he always used to change his team, as you know, right? Mm-hmm. To shake up the style of play, to shake up the personalities, to just ensure that there was a different, if you like, for want of a better word, a different creative vibe being generated, right? And so I think it is always important to look at the makeup of your teams. And, my teams know I look at it quite regularly to give people opportunity, right? Because you grow in a role, that's brilliant. What Accenture does is then give you another more challenging role to go and do. So, I'm not from a creative background, but I'm running this agency, right? Because they have the confidence in saying what you bring is different. I don't need the same, I need different, but I need it to be done in the right way. And so I do think it's important to look at those things as a leader.
Yeah, brilliant. And you're absolutely right that training people and challenging them so that they become high performers themselves does lead to people moving on, and that should be celebrated. It shouldn't be a concern. We should be celebrating that, and it gives a chance for a new voice to come in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I always wrap the podcast with the same question. It's an open question which can take us in any direction, but what one question do you usually get asked that I haven't asked you today?
Oh, you've asked me most things, right, to be honest. What is the one question? You didn't ask me about my hobbies, but we touched on them all, actually. I touched on the hobbies. I touched on, Accenture Song, what's my leadership lessons. I'll be honest, I don't think there was, because I think we covered so much ground, Andy. It was such a great discussion as a result. There wasn't a topic you didn't cover that I normally get picked up on.
What I'm taking from that, which is the clip I think I'll use in promotion, is that, Pritesh, I think you've just said I'm a great podcast host. I think that's what you've just said. So we'll use those words or something similar anyway. But
you are a wonderful podcast host, and I really enjoyed the conversation, Andy.
Now that is definitely going on my LinkedIn bio.
Feel free.
Pritesh, thank you very much for your time. It's been wonderful to find out a bit more about Accenture Song, a bit more about you, and to really kind of get in under the skin of what's going to come in the next couple of years. So thank you for your time. It's been amazing.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for taking the time for sharing your thoughts also.